Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week I'm in a different part of the countryside to my normal part of the countryside, and it is a bit windy, so you will see how this goes. This week in our home churches we're going to be thinking about Mary, St Mary the Virgin. It's the patronal festival for her in one of our churches, and we're going to be thinking about families and what it means to be part of a family. When I was thinking about this for the Rural Challenge for this week, I was thinking how it is very difficult for people in the countryside to be with their families and for families to work as they have always done. So if you are living in a family in a rural setting and you're continuing to do a rural job, which might be dependent on you living on the land, on farming, on agriculture, on all those things, they can be really difficult things. They can provide huge amounts of pressure for people, and actually people, particularly in the farming community, can be really strapped for cash. There can be family issues about who is going to stay on the farm and farm, who isn't going to do that. So that can be a really big strain for farming families in the countryside today. And if your family traditionally comes from a village and you move out of that village as a young person and you don't have a lot of land, or you're not tied to something in particular, the harsh reality is that in a lot of places you aren't going to be able to afford to buy a house to come back to be with your family. So you are going to have to move maybe quite a long way away from home to have your own house, and that you can't be as physically close to your extended family as you would like. And some families feel that they need to give up their house in the countryside altogether and all move into the town because that is the only way that things are financially viable for them. So as we think about families this week, the Rural Challenge is really thinking about how people can be at home, where they are, how those families can flourish, the terrible strain on people caring and looking after land, and the people who have no land and actually maybe just have a house. How is it possible for them to keep their extended families together when house prices in the countryside can be so expensive? This week, when we are thinking about St Mary and we're thinking about families, we've got some set readings which are for St Mary's patronal festival in August. One of those is the Magnificat, and the Magnificat is when Mary talks about being blessed by the Lord, and that he's lifted up the humble and put the mighty down for their seats. Mary says this when she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who's also pregnant with an unexpected baby. But mainly today I wanted to think about families and what families looks like, and what Mary and Jesus and Joseph's family look like. Because when we think about families, we kind of have a very kind of fixed idea, perhaps, or people certainly used to have a very fixed idea of what families look like, but God's families tend to look a bit more mixed up. So for example, we have Jesus and Mary and Joseph and God, and it's really interesting thinking about what do we know about Jesus when he was a baby, and what do we know about him when he was a child? We don't know that much about him from the Bible as a child. We have the kind of birth narratives. We don't know if he was a terrible toddler when he was 2. We don't know if he liked fart jokes when he was 7. But what we do know is that when he was 12, he stayed behind in Jerusalem, and he had been trying to deal with some of the Joseph's my father and God's my father stuff. And what happened was he managed to scare Mary and Joseph completely by them having to rush back to find Jesus in Jerusalem. And that is something which Jesus had to struggle with, had to try and work out what was going on for him. And then we have when Jesus is older and he's dying, he says to John, this is my mother. She is your mother now, you look after her. And he says to Mary, this is your son. So Jesus is saying, actually, this is a family dynamic and the family is changing. And actually, all through the stories of the Bible, there are unusual families. Families which struggle with different difficulties, families which are not necessarily related by blood. And we think about Ruth and what she did, staying with her mother-in-law instead of going back to her biological family. All the sort of patriarchal stories have very difficult families going on. King David's family was not exactly simple. So all the families are very difficult families, or who have suffered complications or difficulties. And we think about that, and we think about families. And I was trying to work out what I really wanted to say as my conclusion for Thought for the Week this week, and that is very much that God can act through all our families, whether they're our biological families or the families that God has given us to love and to care for, like Jesus did for Mary and John. But God can act through all these different forms of families where God's love holds them together. The Dibley Moment of the week. This week happened to me when I was taking someone round one of the church buildings where we live, and he wanted to visit a sweet country church building, so we went in. It was one of the buildings you have to go through someone else's house to get to, and I was like, you'll never guess who's going to be here when we go around the corner. And we got there, and he never did guess, because we went in through the church door, went round the corner, and there she was, Dick Whittington's mum. I bet you were not expecting to find Dick Whittington's mum in this quiet corner of a country church building. And he wasn't. But there you go, in the country, you never know whose family you're going to come across when you are there. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week, and where you can all care for your families together.